Camp Harmony, Part 2, page 150, at the bottom. When Saturday came, Henry had one goal, one mission, find Keiko. After that, who knew? He figured that out later. Henry wasn't quite sure what to make of Mrs. Beatty's offer, but he didn't dare to question it either. She was an intimidating mountain of a woman, and a person of few words. Still, he was grateful. He told his parents she was paying him to help out in the kitchen on Saturdays. His story wasn't quite the truth, but it wasn't a lie either. He would be helping her in the kitchen, at Camp Harmony about 40 miles to the south. Henry was sitting on the stoop outside the kitchen when Mrs. Beatty drove up in a red Plymouth pickup truck. It looked like the old Rambler had been recently washed, but its enormous white-wall tires were splattered with mud from the wet streets. Mrs. Beatty threw a cigarette butt into the nearest puddle, watching it fizzle. "Get in," she snapped as she rolled the window up, the entire truck rocking with the motion of her meaty arm. "Good morning to you, too," Henry thought as he walked around the front of the truck, hoping she meant the passenger seat, not the back. When he peered into the bed of the pickup, all he could make out were box-like shapes hidden beneath the canvas tarp and tied down with a heavy rope. Henry popped into the seat. His parents didn't own a car, although they had finally saved up enough to buy one. With gasoline rationing, buying one now didn't make much sense, according to Henry's father anyway. Instead, they took the transit coach or the bus. On rare occasions, they would catch a ride with his Auntie King, but that was usually if they were going to a family affair, a wedding, a funeral, or the golden birthday or anniversary of some old relative. Being in a car always felt so modern and exciting. It didn't even matter where they were going or how long it took to get there. It always made his heart race, like today. Or was that just the thought of seeing Keiko? "I'm not paying you for travel time." Henry wasn't sure if this was a statement or a question. "That's fine," he answered. "I'm happy just to go. I do it for free, in fact. The Army doesn't pay me for miles, just tops off my gas tank each way." Henry nodded as if this all somehow made sense. Mrs. Beatty was somehow employed in the mess hall, a part-time assignment as far as Henry could tell. "Were you in the Army?" Henry asked. "Merchant Marines. Daddy was, anyway, even before it was officially called that by the Maritime Commission. He was head cook on the SS City of Flint. I'd help out whenever he was in port. Procurement lists, menu planning, prep and storage. I even spent 2 months on board during a run to Hawaii. He used to call me his little shadow." Henry couldn't imagine Mrs. Beatty as little anything. "I got so good at it, he'd call me to help out whenever his old ship was in port. Put me to work for a few days here and there. His best friend, the ship's steward. He's practically my uncle. You'd like him. He's Chinese, too. That's the way it is on those ships. All the cooks are either colored or Chinese, I suppose." That caught Henry's attention. "Do you see them much?" Mrs. Beatty chewed on her lip for a moment, staring ahead. "He used to send me postcards from Australia, New Guinea, places like that. I don't get them anymore." There was a tremor of sadness in her voice. "Daddy's old ship was captured by the Germans 2.5 years ago. Got a photo of him from the Red Cross in some POW camp. A few letters at first, but haven't heard from him in over a year." "I'm so sorry," Henry thought, but didn't say. Mrs. Beatty had a way of having one-sided conversations, and he was used to being on the quiet end. She cleared her throat, puffing out her cheeks. Then she tossed a half-smoked cigarette out the window and lit another. "Anyway, someone down here knew I was handy at cooking for a whole herd and could portion control for feeding kids, too. So they gave me a call, and I couldn't find it in me to say no." She looked at Henry like it somehow was his fault. "So here we are." And there they were, in Mrs. Beatty's pickup, bouncing down the highway past dusty miles of tilled farmland south of Tacoma. Henry wondered about Mrs. Beatty and her missing father, and he stared at fields of cows and draft horses, larger and more muscular than he had ever seen. These were real working farms, not the victory gardens in front of yards and corner lots of homes in Seattle. Henry had no idea what to expect. Would it be like where Mrs. Beatty's father was being held? Couldn't be that bad. He'd heard Camp Harmony was a temporary place, just until the Army could figure out how and where to build more permanent camps further inland. Permanent. He didn't like the sound of that word. Still, they kept calling it a camp, which sounded nice in a way that even Henry knew was probably false. But the beautiful scenery and countryside managed to get his hopes up. He'd never been to a summer camp, but he had seen a picture once in Boy's Life magazine of cabins by a beautiful glass lake at sunset, of campfires and fishing, people smiling, carefree, and having fun. Nothing at all like the quaint town of Puyallup, a small farming community surrounded by lush acres of daffodils. Greenhouses dotted vast yellow fields, and snow-capped Mount Rainier dominated the horizon. As they cruised down the main boulevard past rows of craftsman homes toward Pioneer Park, signs in many shop windows read, "Go home, Japs." The signs were grim reminders that Camp Harmony was no summer camp, and no one would be going home anytime soon. Henry rolled down the window and was hit by the pungent smell of fresh horse manure, or was it from cows? Was there really a whiff of difference? The ripe stench could have been goat or chicken for all he could tell. Either way, it sure smelled a long way from the crisp, salty air of Seattle. Near the heart of Puyallup, they peeled into a wide expanse of gravel parking. Henry looked in awe at the long tables and outbuildings surrounding the Washington State Fairgrounds. By the giant grain silos, he could tell that this was definitely farm country. He'd never been to the fair, and the whole place was larger than he'd ever imagined. The fairground area was probably as large, if not larger, than Chinatown itself. There was a big wooden stadium in need of a fresh coat of paint and what appeared to be a rodeo or livestock pavilion of some kind. Behind that was an open expanse with hundreds of chicken coops in neat little rows. The whole area was surrounded by barbed wire fence. Then he saw people walking in and out of those tiny buildings, with dark hair and olive skin. And he noticed the towers near the fence line. Even from a distance, he could see the soldiers and their machine guns. Their dormant searchlights were aiming at the barren ground below. Henry didn't even need to see the sign above the barbed wire guard gate. This was Camp Harmony. Henry had never been to jail. The one time he'd gone to City Hall was with his father to pick up a meeting permit. A serious nature of the place had spooked him. The marble facade, the cold granite tiles on the floor, everything had a weight to it that was inspiring and intimidating at the same time. Henry felt that way again as he drove inside a holding pen between two large metal gates. Both were covered with new barbed wire and a row of springy coil with jutting points that looked as sharp as kitchen knives. Henry sat stiff. Terrified was more like it. He didn't move as the Army MP came to the window to check Mrs. Beatty's papers. Henry didn't even move to make sure his I am Chinese button was clearly visible. This is a place where someone like me goes in but doesn't come out, he thought. Just another Japanese prisoner of war, even if I'm Chinese. Who's the kid? The soldier asked. Henry looked at the man in uniform, who didn't look like a man at all, more of a boy, really, with a fresh, pimply complexion. He didn't look thrilled to be stuck in a place like this, either. He's a kitchen helper. Miss Beatty was worried about Henry getting to Camp Harmony. Her concern didn't show. I brought him to be a runner, help switch out serving trays, stuff like that. You got papers? This is where they take me, Henry thought, looking at the barbed wire, wondering which chicken coop he'd be assigned to. He watched as the barrel-chested lunch lady pulled out a small file of papers from beneath the driver's seat. This is a school registration showing him as a kitchen worker, and this is his shot record. She looked at Henry. Everyone here has to have a typhoid shot first, but I checked and you're clear. Henry didn't understand completely, but he was suddenly grateful for being sent to the stupid school in the first place. Grateful to have been stuck scholarshiping in the kitchen all these months. Without having to work the kitchen, he'd never have made it this far, this close to Keiko. The soldier and Mrs. Beatty argued for a moment, but the stronger man, or in this case woman, won out, because the young soldier just waved her through to the next holding area where other trucks were unloading. Mrs. Beatty backed into a loading spot to see the parking brake, and set the parking brake. Henry stepped out into ankle-deep mud, which made hollow, sucking sounds as he stuck and unstuck each foot until he reached the row of 2x4 boards that had been set down as a makeshift walkway. Shaking the mud off as best he could and wiping his feet on the boards as he went, he followed Mrs. Beatty into the nearest building, his wet socks and shoes squishing with each step. On the way, Henry could smell something cooking. Not something necessarily pleasant, but something. Wait here, Mrs. Beatty said, entering the cookhouse. Moments later, she reemerged with a uniformed clerk trailing behind as she untied the tarp to reveal boxes of shoyu, rice vinegar, and other Japanese cooking staples. The two of them carried the supplies in, helped by Henry and a few young men in white aprons and caps, soldiers assigned to cooking duty. They set up in a mess hall that was maybe 40 feet long, with rows and rows of tables and brown dented folding chairs. The planks of the wooden floor was a tapestry of grease stains modeled by muddy footprints. Henry was surprised of how comfortable he felt. The camp was intimidating, but the kitchen was home. He knew his way around. He peeked under the lids of rows of steamer trays, twice as many as back at school. Evidently lunch had already been prepared. Henry stared at the wet piles, some brown, some gray, canned sausages, boiled potatoes, and dry stale bread. The greasy smell alone made him long for the food back at Rainier Elementary. At least the condiments that Mrs. Beatty had brought would help in some small way. Henry watched as she and another young soldier went over papers and order forms of some kind. He'd been assigned to serve along with another aproned soldier who looked at Henry and did a double take. Was it Henry's age? It didn't matter. The soldier just shrugged and started serving. He was used to following orders, Henry supposed.